ExamPrep.School. Maine Casualty Insurance Producer Exam, exam code 12-ME-44. There are 4 practice exams in this series. This video covers Practice Exam 1. The first 20 questions are free. In this video, we will be covering the following major categories for Practice Exam 1. Insurance terms and related concepts. Maine laws and rules common to property and casualty. Maine laws and rules pertinent to casualty only. Policy provisions. Types of policies, bonds, and related terms. Let's walk through the format. I'll read each question and its choices. Let's get started. Question 1. Which of the following scenarios would be classified as property damage rather than bodily injury under Section A of a commercial general liability policy? A. An insured's rented excavator is damaged when a wall collapses during demolition. B. A customer suffers a broken arm after slipping on spilled oil in a grocery store aisle. C. An employee develops respiratory illness after inhaling chemical fumes at the workplace. D. A visitor claims compensation for emotional distress after a confrontational incident on the insured's premises. A countdown circle appears in the top right. Once it completes, the answer is revealed. You can pause at any time if you'd like longer to think. If you'd like additional practice covering more topics, see the description for our book. The correct answer is A. The damage to the rented excavator constitutes physical injury to tangible property, which falls under property damage. The other scenarios involve bodily injury or non-physical injury. Reason B is not correct. This describes a bodily injury to a person, not damage to tangible property. Reason C is not correct. This describes bodily injury due to illness rather than property damage. Reason D is not correct. Emotional distress is a personal injury, not property damage. Question 2. Which of the following claims would be covered under Coverage B, personal and advertising injury, of a commercial general liability policy? A. A competitor alleges that the insured used patented technology in product manufacturing. B. A customer files suit for arm injuries after slipping on debris at the insured's vehicle showroom. C. A business is sued for libel based on false statements published in its marketing brochure. D. An insured is found liable for bodily injuries caused during a contracted construction project. The correct answer is C. False statements leading to libel are covered as personal and advertising injury. The other claims involve bodily injury or patent infringement, which are excluded under Coverage B. Reason A is not correct. Patent infringement is not covered under personal and advertising injury. Reason B is not correct. This claim involves bodily injury, which is covered under Section A, not personal and advertising injury. Reason D is not correct. This describes bodily injury liability, not a personal or advertising injury offense. Question 3. Under Coverage C, medical payments of a commercial general liability policy, medical expenses must be incurred and reported within what period from the date of the accident? A. Within 1 year of the accident date. B. Within 2 years of the accident date. C. Within 3 years of the accident date. D. Within 5 years of the accident date. The correct answer is C. Coverage C requires that medical expenses be incurred and reported within 3 years of the accident date. The other timeframes fall outside the policy's limits. Reason A is not correct. 1 year is below the policy's minimum reporting period for medical payments. Reason B is not correct. 2 years does not satisfy the policy's required 3-year limit. Reason D is not correct. 5 years exceeds the maximum reporting period allowed under Coverage C. Question 4. A contractor's CGL policy, incepted January 1, 2020, expired December 31, 2020. In June 2020, faulty wiring installed by the contractor causes a fire in January 2021, and the homeowner reports the claim in February 2021. Which statement best describes coverage if the policy uses an occurrence trigger compared with a claims-made trigger? A. Under an occurrence trigger, coverage applies because injury occurred during the policy period, regardless of when claim is reported. Under a claims-made trigger, coverage applies only if claim is first made during the policy period. B. Under an occurrence trigger, coverage applies only if damage is discovered before policy expiration. Under a claims-made trigger, coverage applies if claim is made during policy period. C. Under an occurrence trigger, coverage applies only if both injury and claim occur within the policy period. Under a claims-made trigger, coverage applies for bodily injury arising from operations. D. Under an occurrence trigger, coverage applies to damage arising until policy non-renewal. Under a claims-made trigger, coverage applies retroactively based on the retroactive date. The correct answer is A. The occurrence trigger covers injury that takes place during the policy term, regardless of when the claim is made, while claims-made coverage requires the claim to be first made during the policy period. Reason B is not correct. This incorrectly limits occurrence coverage to discovery before expiration rather than occurrence timing. Reason C is not correct. This erroneously requires both injury and claim to fall within the policy period for occurrence coverage. Reason D is not correct. This misdescribes both triggers by conflating non-renewal coverage and retroactive date mechanics. Question 5. A landscaping firm maintains a CGL policy that covers the named insured, its employees, leased employees, and volunteer workers. Which individual would not qualify as an insured under that policy when performing landscaping services at a client's property? A. A full-time groundskeeping employee of the firm. B. A volunteer who assists with planting shrubs. C. A subcontracted mowing contractor hired for a specific project. D. An employee leased from a staffing agency and supervised directly by the firm. The correct answer is C. Independent subcontractors are not included as insureds under the firm's CGL policy, whereas employees, leased employees, and volunteers are covered. Reason A is not correct. Employees are explicitly covered under the named insured definition. Reason B is not correct. Volunteer workers are included as insureds under the policy's definitions. Reason D is not correct. Leased employees supervised by the insured are treated as insured employees. Question 6. A general contractor requires a subcontractor be added as an additional insured under the subcontractor's CGL policy before starting work on a new project. Which effect does granting additional insured status to the general contractor have? A. It broadens coverage to include liability unrelated to the subcontractor's operations. B. It transfers the subcontractor's duty to defend the general contractor to another insurer. C. It increases the subcontractor's policy limits for claims brought by the general contractor. D. It extends coverage to the general contractor for liability arising out of the subcontractor's work. The correct answer is D. An additional insured endorsement extends liability coverage to the additional insured for claims arising out of the named insured's work. Reason A is not correct. Coverage is limited to liability related to the named insured's work, not unrelated exposures. Reason B is not correct. Duty to defend remains with the original insurer. It does not transfer insurer obligations. Reason C is not correct. Limits are not increased. The additional insured shares the existing policy limits. Question 7. A manufacturer produces electrical panels that are shipped to and installed by an independent electrician. 6 months after installation, a short circuit in a panel causes property damage to a building. Under the manufacturer's CGL policy, how is this loss classified? A. An occurrence under the product's hazard because damage happened after the product left the manufacturer's possession. B. A premises hazard, since the loss occurred on the insured's installation site. C. A completed operations hazard because damage arose from completed work away from the manufacturer's premises. D. A covered claim only if the electrician's insurer accepts subrogation. The correct answer is C. Completed operations hazard covers bodily injury or property damage that arises out of work completed away from the insured's premises. Reason A is not correct. Products hazard applies to damage caused by a product itself before or during use, not completed work. Reason B is not correct. Premises hazard applies only to injuries on the insured's premises, not post-installation at a client site. Reason D is not correct. Coverage does not depend on the electrician's insurer or subrogation acceptance. Question 8. In a personal auto policy with split limits of $100,000, $300,000, $50,000, BI per person, BI per accident, SPD per accident, the $300,000 figure represents which of the following? A. Maximum bodily injury coverage per person injured in an accident. B. Maximum total bodily injury coverage paid for all injuries in a single accident. C. Maximum property damage coverage paid for damage to a single vehicle. D. Combined maximum for bodily injury and property damage per accident. The correct answer is B. The $300,000 limit is the maximum total paid for bodily injury claims from all injured parties in one accident. The $100,000 figure is the per-person bodily injury limit, and $50,000 is the property damage limit per accident. Reason A is not correct. Describes the per-person limit, which is actually $100,000, not the second figure. Reason C is not correct. Refers to property damage, which corresponds to the third figure of $50,000, not the $300,000 BI limit. Reason D is not correct. Suggests a combined limit, but split limits keep bodily injury and property damage separate. Question 9. Under a standard personal auto medical payments coverage, which of the following individuals injured in an auto-related incident would be eligible for coverage? A. A passenger who is working for pay inside the covered vehicle at the time of injury. B. A named insured family member struck by another vehicle while walking as a pedestrian. C. A person occupying the covered vehicle while performing maintenance on the engine. D. A covered insured involved in loading cargo into the vehicle and injured in the process. The correct answer is B. Medical payments coverage applies to named insureds, family members, and passengers injured while occupying the covered auto, or as pedestrians struck by a vehicle. A family member struck while walking qualifies for medical payments. Reason A is not correct. Work-related injuries are excluded under personal auto medical payments provisions. Reason C is not correct. Injuries during maintenance are non-accident related and therefore excluded. Reason D is not correct. Injuries from loading cargo are not covered under the medical payments coverage. Question 10. Which of the following loss scenarios would be covered by the other than collision portion of a personal auto physical damage endorsement, but excluded under the collision portion? A. Damage resulting from striking a deer that runs into the side of the vehicle. B. Dents caused by hailstones during an unexpected hailstorm. C. Damage when the insured's car rolls off a raised jack during maintenance. D. Scratches sustained when backing into a guardrail. The correct answer is B. Other than collision covers losses from events not involving collision, such as hail, theft, or glass breakage. Hailstone dents fall under OTC, while collisions with animals or objects are handled under collision coverage. Reason A is not correct. Striking an animal is considered a collision loss. Reason C is not correct. Vehicle falling off a jack is treated as a collision-related impact. Reason D is not correct. Impact with a guardrail is classified as collision. Question 11. An insured carries bodily injury liability limits of $100,000 per person and underinsured motorist coverage limits of $300,000 per person. The insured is injured in an accident, caused by a driver who has only $50,000 per person in bodily injury liability coverage. Medical expenses total $120,000. Which coverage applies to compensate the insured for the amount exceeding the at-fault driver's liability limits? A. Uninsured motorist coverage. B. Excess liability coverage. C. Medical payments coverage. D. Underinsured motorist coverage. The correct answer is D. The correct answer is underinsured motorist coverage because it compensates an insured when the at-fault party's liability limits are insufficient to cover the insured's bodily injury expenses. Uninsured motorist coverage applies only if the tortfeasor lacks any liability insurance or is unidentified. Medical payments coverage pays a limited amount regardless of fault. Excess liability coverage responds only after the policy's own liability limits are exhausted. Reason A is not correct. Uninsured motorist coverage is for situations when the at-fault party has no liability insurance or cannot be identified, not when they are underinsured. Reason B is not correct. Excess liability coverage applies only after exhaustion of the insured's own liability policy limits, not to gaps in an at-fault driver's limits. Reason C is not correct. Medical payments coverage pays limited medical expenses regardless of fault and does not cover excess liability amounts. Question 12. A small consulting firm owns no vehicles, but employees frequently drive their personal cars on client business. The firm wants liability protection under its commercial auto policy when employees use their own vehicles for business errands. Which type of auto liability coverage should be added? A. Non-owned auto liability coverage. B. Hired auto liability coverage. C. Owned auto liability coverage. D. Medical payments coverage extension. The correct answer is A. The correct answer is non-owned auto liability coverage because it extends liability protection to autos used in business that are owned by employees rather than the insured. Owned auto liability applies only to vehicles titled to the insured. Hired auto liability covers rented or leased vehicles. Medical payments. Extension covers only medical expenses and does not provide liability protection. Reason B is not correct. Hired auto liability coverage applies to rented or leased vehicles, not to employees' personal cars. Reason C is not correct. Owned auto liability coverage applies only to vehicles owned by the insured, not to personal vehicles of employees. Reason D is not correct. Medical payments coverage extension pays medical costs only and does not provide liability protection. Question 13. A catering company frequently hires vehicles from rental agencies for deliveries but does not own any vehicles. To obtain liability coverage under the business auto coverage form solely for these rented vehicles, which symbol should be selected? A. Symbol 1, any auto. B. Symbol 8, hired autos only. C. Symbol 7, specifically described autos. D. Symbol 9, non-owned autos only. The correct answer is B. The correct answer is symbol 8 because that symbol provides liability coverage specifically for autos the insured hires, leases, or rents. Symbol 1 covers all autos. Symbol 7 applies only to scheduled vehicles. Symbol 9 covers non-owned autos but excludes hired autos. Reason A is not correct. Symbol 1 is too broad, as it covers all owned, non-owned, and hired autos rather than just hired vehicles. Reason C is not correct. Symbol 7 applies only to vehicles specifically listed in the policy schedule, not all hired vehicles. Reason D is not correct. Symbol 9 covers liability for non-owned autos but excludes vehicles that are hired or rented. Question 14. Under the workers' compensation exclusive remedy principle, an injured employee is generally prevented from pursuing which of the following actions against the employer? A. Negligence actions against the employer in civil court. B. Claims for unemployment compensation benefits. C. Tort suits against third-party contractors. D. Requests for disability benefits under a private policy. The correct answer is A. The exclusive remedy principle confines an injured worker's legal remedy to the workers' compensation system, barring common law negligence lawsuits against the employer. Reason B is not correct. Unemployment compensation is a separate statutory system, not impacted by workers' compensation exclusivity. Reason C is not correct. Claims against third-party contractors remain available and are not precluded by the exclusive remedy rule. Reason D is not correct. Private disability benefits fall outside workers' compensation and are unaffected by the exclusivity doctrine. Question 15. Which of the following scenarios would most likely be covered by the employer's liability coverage part of a workers' compensation policy? A. An employee files a civil negligence suit against the employer for chemical exposure leading to illness. B. An injured worker seeks medical treatment benefits under the state workers' compensation system. C. An employee pursues a product liability claim against a machinery manufacturer. D. A former employee applies for unemployment insurance benefits after termination. The correct answer is A. The employer's liability part responds to common law claims by employees, alleging employer negligence or workplace-related disease that falls outside standard workers' compensation benefits. Reason B is not correct. Benefits under the workers' compensation system are separate and handled under the compensation part, not the liability part. Reason C is not correct. Claims against equipment manufacturers are third-party actions, not covered by the employer's liability section. Reason D is not correct. Unemployment insurance benefits are a different statutory program unrelated to employers' liability coverage. Question 16. A machine operator sustains a fractured wrist on the job and is unable to work for 8 weeks. Under statutory workers' compensation benefits, which payment is the insurer required to provide? A. A lump sum settlement for pain and suffering. B. Weekly income benefits during the disability period. C. Reimbursement of employer's legal defense costs. D. Payment for vocational guidance services. The correct answer is B. The correct answer is weekly income benefits during the disability period, because statutory benefits include wage replacement payments for temporary total disability. Other costs such as pain and suffering, legal defense, and vocational guidance are not compulsory statutory benefits. Reason A is not correct. Pain and suffering damages are not covered under statutory workers' compensation, which provides no-fault coverage limited to medical and wage replacement benefits. Reason C is not correct. Legal defense costs for the employer are incurred by the insurer, but are not a statutory benefit paid to the injured worker. Reason D is not correct. Vocational guidance or rehabilitation services may be offered, but are not mandatory statutory benefits in most jurisdictions. Question 17. A delivery driver with a pre-existing shoulder condition aggravates the injury while unloading packages during a scheduled shift. Which factor most directly supports this being a compensable injury under workers' compensation course of employment rules? A. It resulted from lifting items outside of the driver's delivery responsibilities. B. It was an exacerbation of a health condition unrelated to work tasks. C. It happened during the commute from home to the warehouse. D. It occurred while performing assigned job duties during the paid work hours. The correct answer is D. The correct answer is that it occurred while performing assigned job duties during paid work hours because compensability requires that the injury arise out of and in the course of employment. The other options describe scenarios outside the scope of employment or unrelated to assigned tasks. Reason A is not correct. Injuries from tasks outside assigned responsibilities fall outside the scope of employment unless formally authorized. Reason B is not correct. An exacerbation of a pre-existing condition, unrelated to work tasks, does not meet the requirement that the injury arise out of employment. Reason C is not correct. Injuries sustained during a commute are generally not compensable unless covered by a specific exception. Question 18. Under a commercial crime policy's employee dishonesty insuring agreement, coverage is typically triggered by which event? A. Receipt of a written confession from the employee regardless of when the loss is discovered. B. Conviction of the dishonest employee in a court of law. C. Discovery of the fraudulent act by the insured during the policy period or any applicable discovery period. D. Notification to the insurer within 90 days of suspicion of wrongful acts. The correct answer is C. This option is correct because employee dishonesty coverage is based on discovery of the loss within the policy period or any specified discovery period, not on conviction, confession timing, or mere notification of suspicion. Reason A is not correct. Coverage depends on discovering the loss, not on obtaining a confession irrespective of the discovery timeline. Reason B is not correct. Requiring a court conviction is too restrictive. The policy triggers on discovery, not on legal outcomes. Reason D is not correct. Merely notifying the insurer of suspicion does not trigger coverage. Actual discovery of loss is needed. Question 19. While reconciling accounts, a teller discovers that someone altered the payee field on a promissory note, making it payable to an unauthorized party. The policy provides forgery or alteration coverage for covered instruments. Which of the following instruments would be covered under this coverage if similarly altered? A. Commercial invoice. B. Promissory note. C. Medical bill. D. Stock certificate. The correct answer is B. The correct answer is the promissory note because forgery or alteration coverage applies to negotiable instruments or promises to pay a sum certain, such as promissory notes. Reason A is not correct. A commercial invoice is simply a billing document, not a negotiable instrument covered under forgery or alteration coverage. Reason C is not correct. A medical bill is a statement for services and does not qualify as a covered negotiable instrument. Reason D is not correct. A stock certificate represents equity ownership and is not treated as a covered negotiable instrument under forgery coverage. Question 20. During a morning audit, staff find that an unknown thief forced entry into the locked securities vault and removed a bearer bond certificate held for safekeeping. The policy includes inside the premises theft of money and securities coverage. Which loss would be covered under this coverage? A. Office petty cash. B. Client file documents. C. Digital accounting records. D. Bearer bond certificate. The correct answer is D. The correct answer is the bearer bond certificate, because inside the premises, theft of money and securities coverage ensures direct loss of securities held within the insured premises. Reason A is not correct. Office petty cash is classified as money but is typically covered under a separate money coverage form, not this securities coverage. Reason B is not correct. Client file documents are business records and not insured as money or securities under this coverage. Reason C is not correct. Digital accounting records represent data, not tangible money or securities covered under this form. Enjoyed this practice test? Tap like, hit subscribe, and share it with a classmate. Got a question we should tweak? Comment below, we read them all. Find full practice exam books in the description or at ExamPrep.School.